The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, and in that split second of silence before the room erupted in laughter, I heard him say it. Marcus Donovan, my older brother's best friend and business partner, standing there in his $1,000 suit with that smug expression plastered across his face. He turned to the group of executives surrounding him and said it loud, enough for half the room to hear. Look who finally crawled out of whatever hole he's been hiding in. Still wearing those discount store clothes, I see. The tech dropout himself. The laughter that followed felt like needles under my skin. But I didn't react. I just smiled, adjusted my flannel shirt, the one that cost more than his entire outfit combined, but looked like I'd bought it at a thrift store, and walked toward the bar. Because Marcus Donovan had no idea who he was talking to. None of them did. And in about 2 hours, that comment was going to cost him everything. My name is Luke Harrison. I'm 29 years old and I grew up in Cedar Falls, a town so small that the biggest event of the year was when the high school football team made it to regionals. I was the kid who spent more time taking apart old computers in my garage than playing sports. The one who talked about coding and algorithms while everyone else talked about parties and weekend plans. My family never understood me. To them, I was the weird one, the disappointment, the son who couldn't be normal. My older brother, Ryan, was everything I wasn't. Star athlete, straight-A student without even trying, popular, charismatic, the kind of guy who could walk into any room and own it. Our father, Thomas Harrison, looked at Ryan like he'd won the lottery. Every achievement, every trophy, every success was celebrated like a national holiday. When I built my first functioning app at 15, my father asked when I was going to do something real with my life. Before I continue, tell. From which place are you watching this story right now? Please subscribe and like the video for motivation. So I left. At 18, I packed a single backpack, took a bus to Silicon Valley and never looked back. Everyone thought I was insane. My father actually laughed when I told him I was going to work in tech. He said I'd be back in 6 months, broke and humiliated, ready to get a real job. My mother cried, not because she was proud, but because she was embarrassed. What would she tell her friends? That her son was chasing some ridiculous dream? Ryan? He barely noticed I was leaving. He was too busy preparing for college, his football scholarship, his perfect future. I was just the weird little brother who was finally getting out of his way. What none of them knew, what none of them could have possibly imagined, was that I wasn't just going to work in tech. I was going to change it. The first year was brutal. I lived in a closet-sized room with 3 other guys, eating ramen for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I worked as a junior developer at a startup that paid minimum wage and expected 80-hour weeks. I learned everything I could, absorbing knowledge like a sponge, teaching myself programming languages at night, networking with anyone who would talk to me. By 19, I had co-founded my first company. It failed spectacularly within 8 months. We ran out of money, our product had bugs we couldn't fix, and our investors pulled out. I was devastated, but I learned more from that failure than I had from any success. At 21, I tried again. This time, I built something different, an AI-driven analytics platform that could predict consumer behavior with scary accuracy. I called it Epic Systems. I poured every ounce of energy I had into it. I pitched to 47 investors before someone finally said yes. And then everything changed. Within 2 years, Apex Systems was valued at $50 million. Within 4 years, we hit $200 million. By the time I turned 27, we were worth $1.2 billion. I became a billionaire before my 28th birthday, but here's the thing about building something from nothing. You learn to stay quiet. You learn that people underestimate you, and sometimes that's your greatest advantage. So I never told my family. They never asked anyway. To them, I was still the dropout, the kid who threw away his future to chase some stupid fantasy in California. They had no idea I was living in a penthouse in San Francisco, driving cars that cost more than their house, running a company that employed over 3,000 people worldwide. Irony was almost funny, almost. My father would tell people I was working in tech, with this apologetic tone like he was confessing to a crime. My mother would change the subject whenever anyone asked about me. Ryan would occasionally send a text, usually around the holidays, asking how I was doing, with that condescending tone that said he wasn't really asking, he was just being polite, and I let them believe what they wanted to believe. Because someday I knew the truth would be so much sweeter. That day came 3 weeks ago when I got the invitation to Ryan's engagement party. It arrived via email, last minute, probably my mother's idea to avoid looking like the family who didn't invite their own son. The email was formal, distant, with a dress code that suggested I should try to look presentable for once. I almost deleted it, but something made me hesitate. Maybe curiosity. Maybe some buried part of me that still wanted to see my family, despite everything. Maybe I just wanted to see the look on their faces when they finally learned the truth. So here I was, standing in the grand ballroom of the Sterling Hotel in downtown Seattle, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that cost $800 but looked like it came from a clearance rack. My hair was a little longer than the corporate standard, my beard slightly unkempt. I looked exactly like what they expected. The failure, the dropout, the disappointment, and that was exactly what I wanted them to see. The Sterling Hotel was one of those places that screamed old money. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, waiters in white gloves carrying trays of champagne that probably cost more per glass than most people's car payments. Ryan had spared no expense for his engagement party, or rather, his fiancé's family had. Melissa Ashford came from the kind of wealth that made my father's upper middle class income look like pocket change. Her father owned Ashford Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate with contracts across the country. They were the kind of people who summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. I grabbed a drink from the bar and found a corner where I could observe without being noticed. That's when I saw Marcus Donovan holding court with a group of executives, all of them laughing at something he'd said. Marcus was Ryan's best friend from college and his business partner. Together they ran a consulting firm that my father bragged about constantly, Harrison Donovan Solutions, specializing in corporate strategy and digital transformation. My father would tell anyone who would listen how successful Ryan was, how he was making six figures before 30, how he was building something real. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Harrison Donovan Solutions was barely staying afloat. I'd done my research. They'd lost 3 major clients in the past year. Their revenue was down 40%, and they were currently pitching desperately to anyone who would listen, including, ironically, several companies in my investment portfolio. I owned pieces of businesses they were trying to work with, and they had no idea. Marcus spotted me across the room. His eyes widened slightly, and then that smug smile spread across his face. He said something to the executives around him, and they all turned to look at me. I could see them sizing me up, taking in my casual clothes, my unkempt appearance, probably wondering why security hadn't escorted me out. Marcus started walking toward me, and the executives followed like puppies, trailing their master, greeted me with that fake enthusiasm people use when they're about to insult you. "Luke Harrison," he said. "Man, how long has it been?" "Must be, 5 years. Still living out in California? How's the tech thing working out?" He emphasized tech thing like it was a child's hobby, something cute but ultimately meaningless. I told him it was going well and kept my tone neutral. I'd learned a long time ago that the less you say, the more people reveal about themselves. Marcus laughed and turned to his audience. He said, "Luke here dropped out of college to work in Silicon Valley. We all thought he was crazy. Turns out we were right." He looked back at me with mock sympathy. "No shame in it, man. Not everyone's cut out for the corporate world. Some people are just better suited for different things." One of the executives, a woman with sharp features and sharper eyes, asked what I did for work. Marcus jumped in before I could answer. He said last he heard I was doing some coding work, freelance stuff maybe. He asked if I was still doing that or had I moved on to something else. His tone made it clear what he thought of coding work, like it was something people did when they couldn't get a real job. I told him I did some work with artificial intelligence and data analytics. Kept it vague. Let them make their own assumptions. The woman nodded politely, already losing interest. Marcus patted my shoulder like I was a child who'd just shown him a crayon drawing. He said that was great and that there was definitely a market for that kind of thing. Then he launched into a story about how Harrison Donovan Solutions was expanding, how they just landed a major client, how business was booming. Every word was a lie, and I knew it, but I let him talk. That's when Ryan found us. My brother, the golden child, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect suit. He saw me and his expression flickered. Surprise? Confusion? Maybe a hint of embarrassment. He said my name like a question. Luke? I didn't think you'd actually come. He glanced at Marcus, then back at me. When did you get in? I told him I'd just arrived and that I wouldn't miss his engagement party. Ryan's smile tightened. He thanked me for coming and said it meant a lot. His tone said the opposite. He asked if I'd met everyone and gestured to the executives around Marcus. I said I'd just been catching up with Marcus and hearing about how well the business was doing. Ryan's expression relaxed slightly. He launched into the same speech Marcus had given, talking about their success, their growth, their plans for the future. All lies, all desperation masked as confidence. I nodded along, playing the impressed little brother. That's great, I told him. Really impressive. Ryan seemed to grow taller with each compliment, his chest puffing out slightly. This was what he lived for. The validation. The admiration. Being seen as successful. Then he said something that made my jaw tighten. He said he knew things had been tough for me out in California, and that if I ever needed help, I should let him know. He said he might be able to get me an entry-level position somewhere, or at least give me some advice on how to pivot my career. He meant it too. In his mind, he was being generous, the successful older brother, offering to help his struggling younger sibling. I thanked him and told him I'd keep that in mind. What I didn't tell him was that my company had just acquired a controlling interest in one of the businesses. His firm was desperately trying to land as a client. What I didn't tell him was that I could buy his entire company 50 times over without feeling it. What I didn't tell him was that in about an hour, everyone in this room was going to learn exactly who I was. My mother appeared, Patricia Harrison, looking like she'd just bitten into something sour. She took in my appearance with visible disappointment. Luke, she said, you made it. She didn't sound happy about it. She asked why I couldn't have worn something more appropriate, and reminded me that the Ashfords were very particular about appearances. I told her I came straight from a meeting and didn't have time to change, which was true. I just didn't mention that the meeting was with the CEO of a Fortune 500 company who was begging me to invest in his business. My mother sighed that familiar sigh, the one that said, I was a constant source of disappointment she'd learned to tolerate. She told me to at least try to make a good impression and not embarrass Ryan in front of Melissa's family. Then she disappeared back into the crowd, probably to apologize to someone for my existence. I stood there for a moment, letting the familiar feeling of inadequacy wash over me. Then I remembered who I actually was, what I'd actually built, and the feeling disappeared like smoke. I spotted Melissa across the room, Ryan's fiancée, surrounded by a group of women, who all looked like they'd stepped out of the same expensive catalog. Melissa was beautiful in that calculated way some wealthy people are, where every hair, every piece of jewelry, every smile has been carefully constructed for maximum impact. She saw me and her expression froze for just a second before she recovered. She excused herself from her group and walked over to me. She introduced herself warmly, maybe too warmly, like she was trying to compensate for something. Then she said she'd heard so much about me from Ryan. Her tone made it clear what she'd heard, and none of it was good. She asked what I did for work. I gave her the same vague answer I'd given Marcus. She nodded, that polite smile never leaving her face. She said it must be so different from what Ryan does, and that she admired people who could make a living doing creative work. Creative work, like I was a starving artist painting in a garage. Then she leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. She said she wanted me to know that she understood not everyone in Ryan's family had been as fortunate as he had. She said there was no shame in taking a different path, even if it wasn't as successful. She was trying to be kind, I realized, in that condescending way wealthy people sometimes are. She genuinely believed she was being understanding. She had no idea she was talking to someone who could buy her father's company without blinking. I thanked her for her understanding and told her I was happy for her and Ryan. She smiled, patted my arm, and walked away, probably feeling good about herself for being so gracious to the poor relation. I watched her go and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, more like determination. These people had spent years making me feel small. Tonight, that was going to end. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to James Park, my CFO. I asked if everything was ready. He responded immediately. All set, just give the word. I checked the time. 8:30. Marcus was scheduled to give a speech at 9, followed by my father's toast to the happy couple. I had 30 minutes. Time to set everything in motion. I made my way through the crowd toward the hotel manager's office. The Sterling Hotel wasn't one of mine, but I knew the owner. Richard Sterling and I had done business together on several occasions. I'd invested in some of his properties, helped him secure funding for expansions. He owed me favors, and tonight I was collecting. Richard was in his office, exactly where I'd asked him to be. He stood when I walked in, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "Luke," he said, "good to see you. Everything's prepared just like you asked." He gestured to a laptop on his desk. "We've got access to the AV system. Whenever you're ready, we can put whatever you want on those screens." I thanked him and pulled out a flash drive from my pocket. On it was everything I needed. Financial records, company valuations, news articles, press releases. A complete documentation of exactly who Luke Harrison was and what he'd built. Richard took the drive and plugged it into the laptop. He asked if I was sure I wanted to do this. I told him I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Richard nodded slowly. He said that for what it was worth, he thought what I'd built was incredible. He said people like Marcus Donovan and my brother Ryan, they were good at talking and looking successful, but when it came to actually building something real, they didn't have what it took. He said I did, and that was worth more than all their posturing combined. I appreciated that more than he knew. I left Richard's office and headed back to the ballroom. The party was in full swing now. People were dancing, laughing, drinking expensive champagne, completely unaware that their entire evening was about to go sideways. I found a spot near the back where I could see everything. That's when I saw my father, Thomas Harrison, talking to Melissa's father, Gregory Ashford. They were standing near the small stage, where Marcus would soon give his speech. My father looked proud, his chest puffed out as he talked to Gregory. I'd seen that expression before, usually when he was talking about Ryan, never when he talked about me. Gregory was nodding along, looking mildly interested. My father said something that made Gregory laugh. They shook hands. Two successful men congratulating each other on their children's union, completely oblivious to the fact that one of those children was worth more than both of them combined. Marcus stepped onto the stage at exactly 9 p.m. The music lowered. People turned to face him, drinks in hand, ready for the traditional best man speech. Marcus took the microphone and tapped it twice. He thanked everyone for coming and said how honored he was to stand there as Ryan's best friend and business partner. He talked about their college days, their friendship, their shared dreams of building something meaningful together. He talked about how Ryan had always been destined for success, how he'd always known exactly where he was going in life. Then Marcus said something that made my blood run cold. He said, unlike some people, Ryan never gave up when things got hard. He never ran away from responsibility or chased impossible dreams. He stayed focused, stayed grounded, and that's why he's standing here today. about to marry an incredible woman and living the life he deserves. The crowd applauded. My father beamed. Ryan looked embarrassed but pleased, and I knew without a doubt that Marcus was talking about me. The dropout, the failure, the cautionary tale of what happens when you don't follow the traditional path. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Richard. Now, the screen's behind. Marcus flickered. The slideshow of happy couple photos disappeared, replaced by something else entirely. A logo, Apex Systems. The name appeared in sleek, modern font, accompanied by our company symbol. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People squinted at the screens, trying to understand what they were seeing. Marcus turned around, confusion on his face. He said there must be a technical error and gestured to someone to fix it, but the screens kept changing. A news article appeared. Forbes, Apex Systems, valued at $1.2 billion following latest funding round, then another. TechCrunch, meet Luke Harrison, the 28-year-old CEO revolutionizing AI analytics. Then photos. Me, but different from how I look now. Professional headshots. Me shaking hands with the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Me on stage at tech conferences. Me in my office overlooking San Francisco. The ballroom went silent. Marcus stared at the screens, the microphone hanging limp in his hand. I saw my father's face go pale. Ryan stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor. Melissa's mouth had actually fallen open. And then, on every screen in the room appeared one final image. The organizational chart of Apex Systems. At the very top, in clear letters, Luke Harrison, founder and CEO. I stepped forward, walking through the parting crowd. Every eye in the room turned to me. The dropout, the failure, the disappointment. I made my way to the stage and held out my hand to Marcus. He stared at it like it might bite him. Then, mechanically, he handed me the microphone. His face had gone from smug confidence to absolute confusion in under 2 minutes. It was almost worth the 11 years of being looked down on. I addressed the room. Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Luke Harrison, Ryan's younger brother, the one who dropped out of college to work in tech. I gestured to the screens behind me. I founded Apex Systems 11 years ago with $300 and an idea. Today we employ over 3,000 people worldwide, and we're valued at $1.2 billion. I paused, letting that sink in. Some of you may have heard of us. We provide AI-driven analytics to about 60% of the Fortune 500 companies, including several that Harrison Donovan Solutions currently lists as prospective clients. Marcus's face went from confused to horrified. The executives who had been laughing at me earlier suddenly found their shoes very interesting. I continued. I apologize for the interruption, but I thought it was important to clear up some misconceptions. I'm not a struggling freelancer. I'm not working some entry-level coding job. And I definitely don't need career advice from anyone in this room. My father pushed through the crowd. His face was red, whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. He demanded to know what I thought I was doing and said this was Ryan's night. I told him he was right. It was Ryan's night. That's why I wanted everyone here to know the truth, especially since Marcus spent his speech talking about staying focused and not chasing impossible dreams. I looked directly at Marcus. Sometimes I said impossible. Dreams are just dreams that other people are too afraid to chase. Ryan finally found his voice. He asked if this was real and if I actually owned that company. I told him I did and that I'd been running it for 11 years. I said I would have mentioned it sooner, but nobody ever asked. I said they were all too busy assuming I'd failed, too busy looking down on me to ever ask what I was actually doing with my life. The truth hung in the air like smoke. My mother had tears running down her face, though I couldn't tell if they were from shame or shock. Melissa looked like she was trying to recalculate everything she'd just said to me. The executives who'd been laughing earlier were suddenly very interested in networking with me. And Marcus looked like a man who just realized he'd insulted his worst enemy while standing on his enemy's property. Then I dropped the real bomb. I said, speaking of Harrison Donovan Solutions, I wanted to congratulate Ryan and Marcus on their recent pitch to Nexus Corporation. I mentioned that Nexus's CEO, David Chun, had told me all about it. Unfortunately, I continued, Nexus decided to go in a different direction. I paused. They chose Apex Systems instead. We finalized the contract this morning. It's a 10-year deal worth $200 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Ryan's face had gone white. That contract, that specific contract, was supposed to save Harrison Donovan Solutions. It was their Hail Mary, their last chance to turn things around. And I just told them, in front of everyone, that I'd taken it, but I wasn't done. I said I'd also been meaning to mention something else. 3 months ago, Apex Systems acquired a 35% stake in Crawford Industries. I looked at Gregory Ashford, Melissa's father. Gregory, I said, I believe that makes me your largest minority shareholder. Gregory's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The color had drained from his face. I smiled. I continued that I'd been meaning to reach out about some concerns I had regarding the Q3 projections, but this was probably not the time. Maybe we could schedule a meeting next week. The room was spinning now, everyone trying to process what was happening. The loser wasn't a loser. The dropout was a billionaire. The disappointment was more successful than anyone in the room, including the people who'd spent years looking down on him. My father pushed closer to the stage. His voice shook when he spoke. He asked why I never told them and why I let them think I was struggling. I looked at my father, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. I told him he never asked. I said for 11 years, not once did he call to ask how I was actually doing. Not once did he express genuine interest in my life. He just assumed I'd failed because that's what he wanted to believe. I paused. To be fair, I told him that's what they all wanted to believe. Because if I succeeded, that meant they were wrong about me. And none of you could handle being wrong. My mother's voice came from somewhere in the crowd, small and broken. She said my name, Luke, just my name, like a question. I found her in the crowd. I told her that 4 years ago, when Dad had his heart surgery, the bill was $180,000. I said insurance covered most of it, but they were still left with a $35,000 balance. I paused. The hospital mysteriously received an anonymous donation that covered it. That was me. My mother's hands flew to her mouth. I continued. 2 years ago, when Ryan's consulting firm was 3 months behind on office, rent and about to be evicted, they received an investment from an anonymous backer. I looked at Ryan. That was also me. I invested $200,000 in Harrison Donovan Solutions through a shell company. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because you're my family. Even when you made it very clear I wasn't really part of yours, Ryan's face crumbled. He looked like a man watching his entire worldview collapse in real time. Marcus had the decency to look ashamed, though that might have just been fear about what I might do to his business. My father just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I told them I didn't come here tonight to humiliate anyone. I said I came because I was invited, because despite everything, I still wanted to be part of this family. But then I walked in and heard Marcus call me a dropout and a failure. I heard the way everyone laughed. I saw the way you all looked at me with pity and contempt. I said I realized that nothing had changed. After 11 years, after everything I'd built, they still saw me as the disappointment. The microphone felt heavy in my hand. I said, so yes, I decided to correct some misconceptions. Not to make you feel small, but so I never have to feel small again. I looked at Ryan. I'm happy for you and Melissa. I genuinely am. I hope you have a wonderful life together. I looked at my parents. I love you both, even though you made that very difficult sometimes. And I looked at Marcus. As for you, I said, Harrison Donovan Solutions is welcome to pitch to any company in my investment portfolio. I won't interfere, but I also won't hold back just because of family connections. In business, may the best company win. I handed the microphone to a shell-shocked Marcus and stepped off the stage. The crowd parted as I walked through, everyone too stunned to speak. I made it halfway to the door before Ryan caught up with me. He grabbed my arm, forcing me to turn around. His face was red, his eyes wet. He asked why I never told him and said he would have been happy for me. I looked at my brother and saw genuine confusion in his eyes. He really didn't understand. I asked him if he remembered when I told everyone I was leaving for California. I said he'd laughed and told me I'd be back in 6 months working at a gas station. Ryan's face fell. I continued. I asked if he remembered when I called after my first company failed and I told him how hard it was. He'd said maybe it was time to give up and come home, that not everyone was cut out for entrepreneurship. Ryan's mouth opened, but no words came out. I said I stopped telling him things because every time I did, he made me feel like a failure. So yes, I built something incredible, and no, I never shared it with him. Because he'd already made it clear he didn't believe in me. Ryan's eyes filled with tears. He said he was sorry and that he didn't know. He said he was an idiot and he should have been a better brother. I told him sorry was a start. I said we had a lot of years to make up for, but maybe we could begin now. If he actually wanted to know me, not the version of me he'd created in his head, but the real me, then I was willing to try. Ryan nodded, unable to speak. He pulled me into a hug, right there in front of everyone, and held on like he was afraid I might disappear. After a moment, I hugged him back. We stood like that for a while, two brothers who had been strangers finally, starting to find their way back to each other. When we pulled apart, my mother was standing nearby. She looked smaller somehow, like the revelation had physically shrunk her. She walked over slowly, her expensive dress suddenly seeming out of place. She whispered my name again, and this time it sounded like an apology. I asked her if she remembered what. Grandma used to tell me when I was young. My mother shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I told her Grandma always said I was going to do something special. She said I had a fire in me that wouldn't be put out. I paused. She was right. I did do something special. I just wish my own family had believed in me the way she did. My mother collapsed into tears, genuine ones, the kind that come from deep regret. She said she was so sorry and that she'd been a terrible mother. She said she didn't know why she'd treated me that way, why she'd always compared me to Ryan, why she couldn't just be proud of both her sons. I told her we'd have time to figure that out and that therapy might help. I meant it. Rebuilding trust would take years, but at least we were finally being honest with each other. My father appeared, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He tried to speak several times before the words finally came. He said he'd been wrong about everything and that he'd let his own expectations blind him to who I actually was. He asked if I could forgive him. I looked at the man who had made me feel worthless for so much of my life. The man who had never once said he was proud of me. Part of me wanted to make him hurt the way he'd hurt me. But the bigger part of me, the part that had built something meaningful and good, just felt tired. I told him I could work toward forgiveness. I said it wouldn't happen overnight, but I was willing to try if he was willing to actually see me. My father nodded, tears running down his face. He pulled me into a hug, something he hadn't done since I was a child. He whispered that he was proud of me, that I'd done something he could never have imagined, and that he was sorry for being too blind to see it. The next hour was a blur of conversations. Executives who had ignored me earlier suddenly wanted to network. Melissa's father, Gregory, pulled me aside to discuss Crawford Industries, suddenly very respectful and very nervous about having me as a shareholder. Melissa herself apologized for her condescending comments, looking genuinely embarrassed. Marcus approached me last. He looked like a man going to his execution. He said he owed me an apology and that everything he'd said was out of line. He said he'd let jealousy and insecurity make him cruel, and he was sorry. I studied him for a moment. Then I told him I'd accept his apology on one condition. He asked what. I told him Harrison Donovan Solutions was struggling because they were trying to compete in a market they didn't fully understand. Instead of pretending to be experts in digital transformation, they should focus on what they actually did well. Traditional corporate strategy. I said if they pivoted their business model, I'd be willing to send some smaller clients their way. Companies that needed strategy, consulting but weren't Ready for Apex level analytics? Marcus stared at me like I'd just offered him a life raft on a sinking ship. He asked why I would help him after everything he'd said. I told him because being successful wasn't about crushing everyone who'd wronged me. It was about building something better. Besides, if he failed, it would hurt my brother's business too. And despite everything, I didn't want that. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He thanked me and promised he wouldn't forget this. I told him to make sure he didn't and that he should start by treating people with respect, regardless of how successful they appeared to be. He nodded and walked away, looking both humbled and hopeful. The party eventually wound down. Most guests left, though a few lingered to try one more time to network with me. I declined politely and made my way toward the exit. Richard Sterling caught me near the door. He said that was the most interesting engagement party he'd ever hosted and asked if I'd considered going into entertainment. I laughed and told him I'd stick with AI analytics. He walked me out, and we stood in the hotel's grand entrance looking out at the city lights. He told me that for what it was worth, he thought I'd handled everything with more grace than most people would have. He said a lot of people in my position would have come in swinging, would have used their success as a weapon. But I'd done something harder. I'd told the truth and given people a chance to do better. I appreciated that more than I could say. I drove home that night in my Aston Martin, the same car I'd parked in the hotel's garage earlier while everyone assumed I'd taken a bus. The streets of Seattle were quiet, the city settling into its nighttime rhythm. I thought about everything that had happened, everything that had been said. For 11 years, I'd carried the weight of my family's disappointment. I'd built an empire while they thought I was barely scraping by. I'd become someone extraordinary while they saw me as ordinary at best. And tonight, that had finally ended. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. He thanked me for not completely destroying him in front of everyone and said he would have deserved it. He said he wanted to have dinner soon, just the two of us, no business talk, no comparing lives, just brothers catching up. I replied that I'd like that. Another text came in, this time from my mother. She said she'd made an appointment with a therapist and asked if I'd be willing to join her for some sessions. She said she wanted to understand why she'd treated me the way she had and how to do better. I told her I would. 3 months have passed since that night. The story made tech blogs for about a week. Billionaire reveals identity at brother's engagement party. Some outlets made it sound dramatic, like I'd maliciously exposed my family. But the truth, as always, was more complicated than that. Ryan and I have dinner every 2 weeks now. Real dinners where we actually talk. He's told me about the struggles of running his business, the pressure he felt to be perfect, the way our father's expectations had shaped him just as much as they damaged me. We're rebuilding, slowly, finding our way to an actual relationship, instead of the broken one we'd had. Before Harrison Donovan Solutions pivoted their business model like I suggested. They're doing better now, focusing on traditional corporate strategy instead of trying to compete in digital transformation. I've sent them 3 clients so far, smaller companies that needed their expertise. Marcus sends me a thank you text after each one, and each time I can hear the genuine gratitude in his words. He's different now, humbler, more aware of his own limitations. We're not friends exactly, but we're no longer enemies either. My mother has been going to therapy twice a week. She invited me to join her for a family session last month. It was hard sitting in that room, hearing her talk about her own insecurities, her fear that she wasn't a good enough mother, her tendency to project those fears onto me. She cried a lot. So but we're talking now? Really talking? And that's more than we've had in years. She asked me last week if I could teach her about what I actually do. Not to brag to her friends, but because she genuinely wanted to understand the work that had consumed my life for over a decade. I spent 3 hours explaining AI analytics to her, and she listened to every word. My father has been the hardest to connect with. Pride dies slowly in men like him, but he's trying. He called me 2 months ago to ask for business advice, not for Ryan, but for a friend's son who was thinking about starting a company. It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged that I might know something valuable. Last week, he did something that shocked me. He showed up at my office in San Francisco unannounced, just appeared in the lobby and asked the receptionist if he could see me. When I came down, he told me he wanted to see where I worked and what I'd built. I gave him a tour of Apex Systems headquarters, showed him our operations center, introduced him to my executive team. He didn't say much during the tour, just listened and observed. But when we finished, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I'm proud of you, son." I should have said that years ago. I almost broke down right there in front of my entire staff. Those 5 words, the words I'd waited my whole life to hear, finally spoken without reservation or condition. We went to dinner that night, just the 2 of us, and talked for 4 hours. He told me about his own father, about the expectations that had been placed on him, about how he perpetuated the same cycle without realizing it. He said he'd been so focused on Ryan following a path he understood that he'd been terrified by me choosing a path he didn't fear, he admitted, had made him cruel. Ryan and Melissa got married 2 months ago. The wedding was smaller than the engagement party, more intimate. And this time, I was in the wedding party. Ryan asked me to be his best man, said he couldn't imagine anyone else standing beside him. I gave a speech at the reception, and it wasn't about the past or old wounds. It was about new beginnings and second chances, about how family sometimes has to break before it can be rebuilt stronger. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, including mine. Melissa pulled me aside during the reception and apologized, again for how she'd treated me. She said she'd grown up in a world where success was measured by appearances, and she'd never learned to look deeper. She asked if we could start over, if I'd be willing to actually be her brother-in-law instead of just Ryan's estranged sibling. I told her I'd like that debt to Ashford. Industry's situation turned out to be more complicated than I'd expected. Gregory. Ashford was a decent man who'd gotten in over his head with some bad investments. As his largest minority shareholder, I could have pushed him out, taken control, restructured everything. Instead, I brought in some of my best people to help him turn things around. We restructured his debt, streamlined operations, and within 6 months, Crawford Industries was profitable again. Gregory called me last month and said I'd saved his company and probably his family. He said he'd misjudged me completely and that he was grateful I'd been generous, enough to help rather than exploit his weakness. I told him that's what family does, even when that family is just connected by marriage, but the story doesn't end there. About a month after the engagement party, something unexpected happened. I was in my office reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant told me there was someone in the lobby asking to see me. No appointment, no name given, just someone who said it was important. I told her to send them up, curious about who would show up unannounced. The elevator doors opened and out stepped a young guy, maybe 22 or 23, wearing jeans and a hoodie, looking completely out of place in my glass and steel corporate headquarters. He was nervous, fidgeting with his backpack straps, his eyes wide as he took in the surroundings. He introduced himself as David Morrison. He said he was from Cedar Falls, my hometown. He'd heard about me from a news article about the engagement party, about the kid from Cedar Falls who'd become a billionaire. He'd driven 8 hours straight from Pennsylvania to California just to meet me. I asked him what he needed. David looked at the floor, then back at me, and said he didn't need anything exactly. He just wanted to tell me something. He said he was like me, the weird kid in town who loved computers more than sports, the one everyone said was wasting his time. His parents wanted him to go into the family business, take over the hardware store, live a safe, predictable life. But he had dreams that didn't fit in Cedar Falls. I sat down and listened as David told me his story. He'd built an app, a simple thing that helped local businesses manage inventory. It wasn't revolutionary, but it worked. He'd shown it to everyone in town, and they'd all told him the same thing. Nice hobby, but get a real job. Come work at the plant, take over the store. Stop chasing impossible dreams. He was starting to believe them. But then he saw an article about me, about how I'd left Cedar Falls with nothing and built something extraordinary. He said it gave him hope. He wanted to know if I had any advice for someone like him. I looked at this kid, this younger version of myself, and saw every doubt and fear I'd carried at his age. I told him the truth. I said it would be hard, probably harder than he could imagine. There would be moments when everyone he knew would tell him to quit, to come home, to stop embarrassing himself. There would be times when he'd want to believe them, because doubt is easier than courage. But I told him if he really believed in what he was building, if he really had that fire inside him that wouldn't go out, then he had to try. Because the regret of not trying would haunt him forever. David's eyes filled with tears. He thanked me and turned to leave. But before he reached the elevator, I stopped him. I asked him to send me his app, let me see what he'd built. He looked shocked, like he couldn't believe I was serious. I told him I was always looking for talented developers, and if his app was as good as he said, maybe Apex Systems had a place for him. Maybe he could join our incubator program, get funding, mentorship, access to resources. David couldn't speak. He just nodded, shook my hand, and left. 2 weeks later, I got his app. It was rough, unpolished, but the core concept was solid. More importantly, I could see the potential in his code. The creativity, the problem-solving skills. I called him that same day and offered him a position in our incubator program. 6 months of funding, office space, mentorship from our senior developers, everything he needed to turn his idea into something real. David cried on the phone. He said he couldn't believe this was happening and that nobody back home would believe him. I told him to let them doubt. Let them think he was crazy. Because when he succeeded, and I had no doubt he would, their doubt would make his success that much sweeter. That conversation sparked something in me, an idea that had been forming since the engagement party, but hadn't fully crystallized until David showed up at my door. I realized I had something more valuable than money. I had experience, knowledge, proof that you could come from nothing and build something extraordinary. And there were probably hundreds, maybe thousands of kids like David out there, like I had been, being told their dreams were impossible. So I started the Harrison Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to finding talented kids from small towns, kids who didn't fit the traditional mold, kids who were being told to give up on their dreams. We provide scholarships, mentorship, access to resources, everything I wish I'd had when I was starting out. In the first year, we've helped 47 young entrepreneurs get started. 3 of them have already launched successful companies. 2 have joined Apex Systems full-time. And all of them have the chance to prove that where you come from doesn't determine where you end up. My family's reaction to the foundation was surprising. My mother volunteered to help with outreach, using her connections in small Pennsylvania communities to identify promising candidates. My father donated a substantial amount of money, said it was the least he could do to make up for not believing in me. Ryan serves on the board, handling the administrative side, making sure our funding goes where it needs to go. Even Marcus has gotten involved, offering consulting services to our entrepreneurs free of charge. We're all trying, in our own ways, to turn past mistakes into future opportunities. Last month, we had our first Harrison Foundation Summit, bringing all our entrepreneurs together for a weekend of workshops, networking, and mentorship. I gave the opening speech, standing in front of 47 young people who reminded me so much of my younger self. I told them my story, not the sanitized version, but the real one. The failures, the doubts, the moments when I almost gave up. The family who didn't believe in me, the people who looked down on me, the times I felt like maybe everyone was right, maybe I was chasing an impossible dream. But I also told them about the moment I realized something crucial. Other people's opinions of me were none of my business. What mattered wasn't whether my family believed in me, whether Marcus respected me, whether anyone thought I would succeed. What mattered was whether I believed in myself. And once I truly, deeply believed, nothing else could stop me. I told them they would face people who underestimated them. Let them. While those people were busy looking down, they wouldn't see you rising up. I said they would face family members who didn't understand their choices. Love them anyway, but don't let their fear become your prison. They would face moments of crushing self-doubt. Feel it, acknowledge it, then keep moving forward anyway. The room was silent. I looked at those 47 faces and saw belief starting to form. Not belief in me, but belief in themselves. That was worth more than any business success I'd ever achieved. After the speech, a young woman approached me. Her name was Sarah Chun, 19 years old. From a small town in Ohio, she was building an educational platform for underprivileged students. She thanked me for the foundation and said it had changed her life. Then she asked me something that stopped me in my tracks. She asked if I had forgiven my family for not believing in me. I thought about that question for a long moment. Had I forgiven them? Really, truly forgiven them? I told Sarah the truth. I said forgiveness wasn't a moment, it was a process. Some days I felt like I'd completely moved past everything. Other days I'd remember something my father said, something Marcus did, some moment where I'd felt small and worthless, and the old anger would come back. But I was working on it. Because holding on to that anger didn't hurt them, it hurt me. And I'd spent too many years letting other people's opinions define me. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. Not even through my resentment. Sarah nodded like she understood completely. She said her own family had cut her off when she'd turned down a full scholarship to medical school to pursue her startup. They'd told her she was throwing her life away. She hadn't spoken to them in 8 months. I told her to call them. Not to apologize, not to explain, just to remind them she still loved them. Because someday, if she was lucky, they'd come around like my family did. And when that happened, she'd want to have kept the door open. Sarah hugged me, tears in her eyes, and promised she'd call them that night, 3 months ago. Something else happened that brought everything full circle. I got a call from Cedar Falls High School. The principal, a woman named Mrs. Henderson, said they wanted to honor me as a distinguished alumnus. They wanted to fly me back to Pennsylvania, have me speak to the students, show them what was possible. My first instinct was to decline. I hadn't been back to Cedar Falls since. I'd left at 18. The memories there weren't exactly pleasant. But then I thought about all those kids sitting in that school right now, feeling like I'd felt like they didn't fit, like their dreams were too big for a small town. So I said, yes, flying back to Cedar Falls was surreal. The town looked exactly the same. Same main street, same diner, same hardware store where David Morrison's family worked. But I was completely different. I rented a car at the airport, drove through the streets I'd walked as a kid, and felt like a ghost visiting his own past. The assembly was held in the gymnasium, the same place where I'd spent countless uncomfortable hours in PE class, always picked last for teams, always feeling like I didn't belong. Now I stood at center court while 800 students and their parents filled the bleachers. Mrs. Henderson introduced me, talking about my success, my company, my foundation. She said I was proof that Cedar Falls could produce extraordinary people. I took the microphone and looked out at those faces. So many of them reminded me of me, the awkward kids in the back, the ones who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, the ones who didn't fit the traditional mold. I spoke directly to them. I said some of them probably felt like they didn't belong here, like they were different from everyone else, like their dreams were too weird, too big, too impossible for a small town. I told them they were right. They were different, and that was their superpower. I told them about being the weird kid who took apart computers instead of playing football, about being told I'd never amount to anything, about leaving with $200 and a dream everyone said was impossible. I told them about the failures, the struggles, the moments I almost gave up, and I told them about what happened when I didn't give up, when I kept pushing, kept believing, kept building, even when everyone said to stop. I said Cedar Falls was a great place to be from, but it didn't have to be where their story ended. They could leave and build something extraordinary. They could chase dreams that seemed impossible. They could prove everyone wrong, but here's the most important part, I told them. When you succeed, and you will succeed if you keep pushing, don't do what I almost did. Don't use that success as a weapon against people who doubted you. Use it as a bridge. Use it to help other people who feel like you once felt. Use it to prove that success isn't about crushing your enemies. It's about lifting up everyone around you. The applause when I finished was deafening. But what stuck with me was afterward. when a steady stream of students came up to talk to me. The programmer who wanted to build video games but whose parents wanted him to be a doctor. The artist who was being pushed toward business school. The inventor who everyone said was wasting his time. I spent 3 hours talking to them, giving advice, sharing contacts, offering hope. One kid, a sophomore named Tyler, waited until everyone else had left. He told me his father worked at the same insurance company my brother used to work at. He said his dad talked about me sometimes, about how I'd throw my life away, how I'd embarrass my family by dropping out. Tyler said he'd believed those stories until today. He asked if it was true that my own family didn't believe in me. I told him it was true, at least at first. But I also told him they'd come around eventually. And even when they didn't believe, even when nobody believed, I believed in myself. That was enough. Tyler thanked me and started to walk away. Then he turned back and said something that hit me harder than anything else that day. He said his older brother had committed suicide 2 years ago. He'd wanted to be a musician, but everyone told him it was a stupid dream, that he needed to be realistic. He'd given up on music, taken a job he hated, and 6 months later, he was gone. Tyler's voice cracked as he said this. He told me that listening to me talk made him think about his brother, and about how maybe if his brother had heard that it was okay to chase impossible dreams, maybe he'd still be here. I didn't have words for that. I just pulled Tyler into a hug and let him cry. After a moment, I told him to chase his dream, whatever it was. Chase it with everything he had. Do it for himself and do it for his brother. Show the world that some dreams are worth dying for, which means they're definitely worth living for. Tyler nodded against my shoulder and whispered that he wanted to be a writer. I told him to write then. Write like his life depended on it. Write like his brother's memory deserved it. And when he finished his first book, to send it to me. I'd be the first person in line to read it. I left Cedar Falls that evening feeling lighter than I had in years. The ghosts I'd carried from that town, the shame, the feeling of not belonging, they didn't have power over me anymore. I'd gone back as the person they said I'd never become, and I'd used that platform not to gloat but to help. That felt better than any revenge could have. The drive back to the airport took me past my childhood home. I slowed down, looking at the house where I'd grown up, where I'd felt so out of place, where my dreams had seemed impossible. The current owners had painted it a different color, added a new fence, made it theirs. It wasn't my house anymore, and that was okay, because home wasn't a place. It was what I'd built, who I'd become, the family I was rebuilding, the people I was helping dow. I'm sitting in my office in San Francisco, looking out at a city full of dreamers and builders, and I'm thinking about everything that led here. The pain, the rejection, the years of feeling worthless. The moment I decided to prove everyone wrong. The slow, difficult climb to success. The night I revealed who I'd become to people who thought I was nobody. The gradual rebuilding of relationships I'd thought were broken forever. All of it led here, to this moment where I'm not just successful, but fulfilled. Where I'm not just rich, but purposeful. Where I'm not just proving people wrong, but helping others prove themselves right. My assistant just buzzed to tell me, I have a visitor. No appointment, someone asking to see me urgently. I smile, remembering David Morrison showing up the same way, and tell her to send them up. Maybe it's another kid from a small town with a big dream. Maybe it's someone who needs help, guidance, a chance. Maybe it's someone who's been told they're not good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. Whoever it is, I'll listen. I'll help if I can. Because that's what this was all for. Not the money, not the success, not even the satisfaction of proving everyone wrong. It was to reach a place where I could look at someone who felt like I once felt and tell them with absolute certainty that their impossible dream isn't impossible at all. It's just waiting for them to believe in it enough to make it. The elevator doors open, and a young woman steps out, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. She's carrying a laptop covered in coding stickers, wearing clothes that have seen better days, and her eyes have that mixture of hope and fear I recognize instantly. Before she can introduce herself, I stand up and extend my hand. I welcome her and tell her to come in and tell me her story. Because everyone deserves someone who will listen, who will believe, who will see potential where others see failure. Everyone deserves a chance to prove that where they start doesn't determine where they finish. And if I learned anything from my journey, from that engagement party that changed everything, from the family relationships I rebuilt, from the kids I'm helping through the foundation, it's this. The best revenge isn't making people feel small. It's becoming so big, so successful, so secure in yourself that their opinions don't matter anymore. It's using your success to lift others up instead of pushing others down. It's proving that kindness and generosity are signs of strength, not weakness. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to win. It's to build something so meaningful that winning becomes irrelevant. My brother texted me this morning. Just a simple message saying he was proud of me and that he was grateful I'd given him a second chance. My mother sent me a photo from her therapy session, a worksheet about breaking generational patterns, with a note saying she was doing the work. My father called to ask if I'd come home for Thanksgiving, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted me there. Marcus emailed me a business update, signing off with, "Thank you for everything," and David Morrison. The kid from Cedar Falls who showed up at my door just got accepted into Y Combinator with his app. He credited me in his application essay, said I'd shown him that success was possible. These moments, these small victories in rebuilding relationships and helping others, they mean more than any business deal, any company valuation, any award or recognition. Because I finally understand what success really means. It's not about the size of your bank account or the value of your company. It's about the impact you have on people's lives. It's about becoming someone who makes the world a little bit better, a little bit kinder, a little bit more hopeful. That's what I'm building now. Not just a company, but a legacy. Not just wealth, but meaning. Not just success, but fulfillment. So to everyone out there who feels like the dropout, the disappointment, the one who doesn't fit in, hear me clearly. Your story isn't over. The people who underestimate you now will be the ones reading about you later. The dreams they call impossible are just dreams they're too afraid to chase. And the moment you decide to stop living by their definitions and start living by your own, that's the moment everything changes. Stay stubborn. Stay hungry. Stay true to yourself. Build something so extraordinary that their doubt becomes irrelevant. And when you finally succeed, when you finally become everything they said you couldn't be, use that success to help someone else who's exactly where you once were, because that's the real victory. Not proving them wrong, but proving yourself right. Not making them feel small, but making yourself feel infinite. Not revenge, but redemption. And not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. Everyone who needs someone to believe in them. Everyone who's waiting for permission to chase their impossible dream. Be that person. Be that proof. Be that hope. That's what I'm trying to be. That's what we all should try to be. And that's how we turn our pain into purpose, our struggles into strength, our doubts into determination. The woman with the laptop is telling me her story now about the small town in Montana, where everyone said her coding skills were a waste of time, about the family that wanted her to take over the family ranch, about the app she built that could revolutionize agricultural technology. I'm listening, really listening. Seeing in her the same fire I once had, the same stubborn refusal to accept other people's limitations. And when she finishes, I'm going to tell her what I wish someone had told me at 18, that she's not crazy, that her dream isn't impossible, that the world needs exactly what she's building. And then I'm going to help her make it real, because that's what this was all for. Not the money, not the success, not the satisfaction of watching Marcus Donovan's face go pale when he realized who I was. It was for moments like this, when I can look someone in the eye and tell them with absolute certainty that they can make it, that they will make it, that their story is just beginning. And somewhere in a small town just like Cedar Falls, there's a kid sitting in front of a computer, feeling like they don't belong, dreaming of something bigger. And maybe, just maybe, they'll hear about the tech dropout from Cedar Falls who became a billionaire. And maybe that will give them hope. Maybe that will give them courage. Maybe that will be the spark they need to keep going. And that right there, that possibility, that's worth more than any company valuation, any net worth, any recognition or award. Because in the end, we're not remembered for what we built. We're remembered for who we helped build themselves. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not Luke Harrison the billionaire, but Luke Harrison the guy who proved that impossible dreams are just dreams nobody else was brave enough to chase. The guy who turned his family's doubt into his greatest motivation. The guy who used his success to lift others up. The guy who proved that where you come from doesn't determine where you end up. That's who I want to be. That's who I'm becoming. And that's the story I want to tell. Not one of revenge, but of redemption. Not one of bitterness, but of hope. Not one of tearing others down, but of building everyone up. Because at the end of the day, that's what success really means. Not having everything, but being everything you were meant to be. And helping others do the same.